Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem. Daf Gimel Amud Aleph. We'll begin a couple words before on the bottom of Daf Beis Amud Beis. Our Gemara is speaking about the kara, the crossbeam of the mavoi. And we explained, according to Rav, that the source for why the Chacham say you cannot have a crossbeam higher than 20 amos is because we learn it out from the entranceway of the Heichal. Ask the Gemara the following question: Ele me'ato, if that's so that we're learning out from the Heichal, according to what Rav is saying, on top of Gimel Amud Aleph, lo tehani le amalturo, then an amalturo should not be helpful, should not help to then have the height above 20 amos. What is an amalturo? The Gemara will explain, but basically it's an embellishment of the kara, the crossbeam itself, whereby a person's attention is drawn to that embellishment. So even if it's above 20 amos, he'll notice that crossbeam. So it says over here that if indeed that the source for an entranceway is the Heichal, so then it means to say that it should be above 20 amos, because it did have this embellishment called an amaltero. The Heichal amaltero havyolei afilu hoki esrim amo hu de gavoya. And therefore, since the Heichal did have the amaltero, then it should also then be above the height of esrim amo. And yet, it states, Disnan chamesh amalterois shel milas hayu al gabov. We do know from the Mishnah that indeed, that in the Ulam, it had the amaltero, 5 of them, situated, that was made with oak embellishment, zu lemala mizu v'zu lemala mizu, this on top of the other one, and yet again, the Heichal was not above 20 amos. V'hai mai tiyufta, asked the Gemara, what kind of question, what kind of refutation is this? Dilma kitanya hachida amalterois be'ulam tanya. The amaltero that we're speaking about over here in this Mishnah is really speaking about the ulam and not the Heichal. So therefore, it's not a kasha that the ulam has these amalteros, because the ulam was indeed much higher, but in terms of the entranceway of the Heichal, that's only 20 amos. The Gemara says no. V'hai mai kusha dilma tavnis Heichal kitavnis ulam. The tavnis of the Heichal, that means the architectural structure of the Heichal was the same that of the ulam, and therefore, just like the ulam also had the amaltero, so too the Heichal also had the amaltero. Aloma Amar Rabbi Eloi Amar Rav. Why did Rabbi Eloi say in the name of Rav, Rachava Dalid Afapisha Eina Beria? He said 2 halachas. The first halacha is not relevant to us, but he said that the width of the crossbeam of the kara has to be, it can even be something that is not strong enough to hold a stone, a half levena. V'im yesh lo amaltera afilu gavoya yosem esrim amma eino tzarich l'mayit. But the second halacha that Rav states is relevant to us, and he states that if it has an amaltera, then you can have then a height above the 20 amos. So here we're left with a question. On the one hand, Rav said that we learn out from the Heichal that the maximum height that the kara, the crossbeam, can be put on the mavui is 20 amos. Yet over here he says that if it has an amaltero, you can be beyond the 20 amos height. Well, we know that a Heichal has an amaltero. Answers the Gemara, Rav Yosef amaltero masnisahi. It's not a kasha specifically on Rav, because it was taught by the Brisa. The Brisa stated above that above Esrim Amma is no good, even though indeed we know that the Heichal itself had an amaltero. Man Katoni Lo, who is the one who authored this Brisa? Amar Baye v'ho chama b'rei de Rabbe bar Avua Katoni Lo. V'tihave amaltero masnisa v'tikshi l'Rav. Then even if indeed there's an amaltero in the Brisa, you can still ask on Rav. Because again, Rav is stating over here that we learn out from the Heichal. And the Brisa is stating that above Esrim Amma, can be made if you have an amaltera. So how do the two things fit together? If indeed we're learning from the heichal, then it should also be above the esrim amma. Omar lach Rav said, Dal ana mehacha. Take me out, remove me from here. In other words, even if I don't give my opinion, and still you're going to have a contradiction between the two braisos. Masnisa milokashna dadi. Isn't there not a contradiction within these two braisos? Again, one braiso states that it can't be above esrim amma, because that's beyond the height of the heichal. On the other hand, the brisa says if you have an amaltera, then you could go ahead and yes, have above esrim amma. Elamai islach lememor. So therefore, Rav says, what will you say to then miyashev the two brises? Tanoi. That's a machlokes tanoim. That's how we can reconciliate the two brises. Ledidi nami tanaihoi. Therefore, according to me, it's not a contradiction either, because they're two different tanoim. One brisa is authored by one Tana that says that if you have an amaltera, then it does allow you to then have above esrim amma. Whereas the other brisa that learns from the heichal says that amaltera does not help, even though the heichal does have an amaltera, but it does not help to then have a height beyond that esrim amma. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak answers differently than the Rav, how Rav asked him. Rav just said that the way to miyashev these two brises states a machlokes tanoim. But Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak explains the following: Beloy Rav masnioso ahadodi lokashin. Without Rav, we can also explain that the two brises are not in contradiction. L'Rabbanan kara taima mai mishum hekera. According to Rabbanan, why did they say you need a crossbeam to begin with in a mavui? As a heker, to then cause a person to be aware that he's in a mavui. Because if the whole concern is that if you may carry in the mavui, you may also then carry in the Rishus Harabim. Or some learn if you carry in the mavui, you might come to then carry in the Rishus Harabim from the mavui. Therefore, we need a crossbeam to make a heker, to make it then apparent to the person who is in the mavui that this is a mavui, whereby he'll recognize it's a mavui and it makes a distinction between that and the Rishus Harabim. And that which it states that you can't go beyond the esrim amma, using the heichal only as a siman to say that it's 20 amos, meaning the height, the maximum height is 20 amos. But of course, if you do have an amaltla, if you do have this thing that's going to embellish the crossbeam above 20 amos, then indeed you can go ahead and make it higher than 20 amos. But the normal height, maximum height of a crossbeam for the mavui is 20 amos. Says the Gemara Vaiter, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, that which we just brought the opinion of Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak that said it's a siman. That means to say that it's a siman to tell you that there's 20 amos, just like the Heichal's height was 20 amos. It's not 30 amos, not 40 amos, but rather the maximum height is 20 amos. Again, barring that you're not having an amaralta, you don't have this embellishment. So ask the Gemara, Hanicha iloi svirulei hodarabba. That's very well if you say that Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak does not go with the shita of Rabbah. Because the shita of Rabbah is one of the few shitas, there are a few different shitas in the beginning of Masechet Sukkah that explain why the Sukkah's schach cannot be higher than 20 amos. So Rabbah is one of those opinions. So the Gemara is now saying it's good if you say Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak is not like Rabbah. What is Rabbah's shita? As follows. That Rabbah said it over there in Sukkah. The reason again why the Sukkah, the height of the schach cannot be higher than 20 amos. Ksiv, it's written in the pasuk in regards to Sukkah, Leman yedu daroseichem ki besukkos hashafti, so that all of the future generations will know that I made Klal Yisrael dwell in Sukkahs, and therefore by sitting this Sukkah, you'll become cognizant that you're in the Sukkah. So that's going to be apparent if the schach is within 20 amos. Above 20 amos, the person will then lose that awareness that he's in the Sukkah, whereby the whole purpose that HaKadosh Baruch Hu then put us in the sukkahs to remind us that He put us in the sukkahs in the midbar, that will then be left out. We won't be able to have that reminder, and therefore the sukkah will be poser. Ad esrim amma adam yoshev shedar besukkah lamal me'esrim amma ein adam yodeh mishum v'lo sholta be'ena. Up until 20 amos, the person's his eyes is shoylate. That means that he becomes aware that he's in the sukkah by seeing the schach above. But if it's higher than 20 amos, says Rabbah, a person will forget that he's sitting in the sukkah, and therefore the whole reason behind sitting in the sukkah will then be absent. So it's all very good that Rav Nachman, if he would not go like Rabbah, because Rabbah said the whole inyan is a heker, to be cognizant of the sukkah, and Rav Nachman said the whole inyan of a mavui is a heker. Aloma gabi sukkah nami beheker, please, because sukkah is also then an inyan of heker. Why wouldn't he need the same machlokes between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda that we have in the Mishnah and Sukkah? Why would you need that same machlokes here in the Mishnah and Eruvin by Mavui? If lugu bitarti lamali, it would be redundant, it would be superfluous to have the same machlokes in a second place. Answers the Gemara Tzricha, we need both machlokesin, the machlokes between Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda in Sukkah, as well as the machlokes between them here in Eruvin by Mavui. If we would only hear the machlokes is between them in Sukkah, that has to be, according to the Chachamim, up until 20 amos. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the schach can be above 20 amos. Rabbi Yehuda, in this Rabbi Yehuda said it can be above 20 amos in Sukkah. Kivan the lishiva avida shalta be'ena. Since a person is sitting in the Sukkah, then his eyes will be cognizant of the fact that he's in the Sukkah when it's above 20 amos, says Rabbi Yehuda. He can still be aware. But if a person is merely walking in the mavui, then his eyes will not detect the cross beam above. And therefore, you might think that Rabbi Yehuda would say, like the Rabbanan, it has to be only up to 20 amos and not higher. And if I only heard the machlokes between the Rabban and Rabbi Yehuda in the beginning of Eruvin by Mavui, it is in this that the Rabbanan said their din, there has to be only 20 amos. But in the case of Sukkah, when a person is sitting the Sukkah, maybe you'll say that his ayin is shoylet even above Esim Amma, and they would agree with Rabbi Yehuda. Tzricha, and therefore we need them both to say that the machlokes in Sukkah is equally a machlokes in Mavui, and the machlokes in Mavui is equally a machlokes in Sukkah. Now goes back to the Gemara. What is that which we said before, this embellishment that's on the cross beam that will allow it to be more than Esrim Amma? My Amaltra. What is Amaltra that we're referring to? Answers the Gemara to explain with two different opinions. Rav Chamo berei d'Rabba bar avua amrei kine. He says it's like a bird's nest that is like attached to the crossbeam that gives a person then draws a person's attention. Ki osa Rav Dimi Omar Ame b'Ma'arava. Rav Dimi then said that they said in Eretz Yisrael, Paske, it is da'arza, Paske da'arza, it's poles of a cedar tree, poles that are connected to the crossbeam, that are sticking out, again drawing a person's attention. Man de omer poske da arza koshaken kina. The one who says poske, the poles of the cedar tree, then certainly when it comes to the bird's nest, which is even more bolet. Man de omer kine aval paske da arza loy. But the one who says the kinim, since that itself is a nest, that's more bolet, he agrees, he says to that, but he not necessarily say that it comes to a cedar tree that is cedar poles that are stuck in, that will be enough of a heker. Uman damer paski da'arze, my taima, mishum denafish mashche, is if it's because of it's elongated, there's a considerable length to these poles. V'hos sukkah denafish mashche, v'kamri rabbanin deloy. In the sukkah also, the schach is elongated, and therefore still the Rabbanan say not. So why should that be a reason to allow it to be more than 20 amos? Because you have this amaltra on the crossbeam. when it comes to the sukkah, the Rabbanan say above Esrim Amma is not going to be valid. Ella kivan de kachashiv isle kala. Rather, the reason why, when it comes to the crossbeam, the amaltera is different because that is something that brings a kol, meaning to say because of its chashivus, people then are drawn to it. Whereas the schach, a person will not see the schach is above Esrim Amma. The Gemara now brings the following: what happens when we have partial kara above Esrim Amma and partial below? Says the Gemara, mikzas kara b'toich esrim, mikzas kara l'malam esrim. If you have a partial of the crossbeam that is above the esrim amma and partial that is below the esrim amma, mikzas schach b'toich esrim, mikzas schach l'malam esrim. You have partial schach above esrim amma and partial below. Omar Rabbi says, b'mavui kosher, b'sukkah posel. He says when it comes to a mavui, it's going to be posel. But in a sukkah, it will be valid. Sorry, the opposite. A mavui is kosher, says Rabbah, but a sukkah is posel. My shna b'mavui the kosher. What's the reason that you're saying when it comes to a mavui it would be kosher? Is it because the amre kalosh? Is it because that you are making it like the thin layer that's below? And therefore you're ignoring what's on top and you're looking only what's below within the 20 amos. Then sukkah nami le'mekloish. Then when it comes to the sukkah, the schach, also ignore what's above and look at the bottom layer, which is within 20 amos. The Gemara says if we do that when it comes to the sukkah, then we'll say that the schach has less shade than sun, and therefore it will postel the sukkah. Ask the Gemara, Hachanami, ikalshus havolei kara haniteles beruach. If you're also going to say that we look only at the thin bottom layer of the kara, so it'll be also so thin that a wind can blow it off, and that will make it invalid. If it doesn't have the substantiation to withstand a wind, then it's going to be invalid. You must say that the crossbeam, we view it as if it's like a metal shipud, a metal stake that is now inside of the 20 amos. If that's the case, Gemara asks, Hochanami, al korchin naasit tzilusa meruba mechamosa. The same thing with schach. We should also view it as the tzel, the shade is greater than the chama, than the sun, and therefore it should be valid too. So in other words, if you're going to then make the mavui valid, then you should also make the sukkah valid. Omar Rabba Meparzika answers the following answer: Sukkah de liyachid hulo midka. Since sukkah is by the individual, so therefore, if the bottom layer becomes undone and you're only left with the top, which is above Esrim Amma, so then he won't be reminded, and therefore he'll leave it, and therefore that's a problem and a reason to be poisel. But mavui de rabbi minka hadodi. But when it comes to the crossbeam of the mavui, since the rabbim are using the mavui, so therefore many people will then ultimately notice that if the bottom within 20 amos is missing, somebody will come to fix it. Ravina gives an alternative answer. He says the reason why there's a distinction between mavui being kosher and sukkah being posel is because sukkah di araisa achmira ba rabbanan, mavui di rabban lachmir be rabban. Since sukkah is di araisa, the chachem were concerned that if the bottom layer becomes decayed and not used, and you're left with only the top above Esrim Amma, it will invalidate the sukkah, which is a mitzvah di araisa. Whereas when it comes to the mavui, if indeed the bottom part is going to be missing, then at most a person will only be then walking in the mavui, and it'll be an isid rabbanon. So therefore they were not makpid. Rav Ada bar Masna Masi lo hashmaitze de Rabba ifcha. The Gemara says that the same question that we just asked, when you have mixas of the kara above Esrim Amma and mixas below Esrim Amma, and you have mixas schach above Esrim Amma and mixas schach below Esrim Amma, he teaches that which Rabbi said in the opposite way. Omar Rabbi b'mavui pasol b'sukkah kshera. He says that What Rabbah said was that by mavui it is possible, and by ksuka ksher, the exact opposite. Says the Gemara, Maishna sukkah diksher damin kloish. What is the reason why sukkah is going to be valid? Is because you say the thin layer of schach below is how we view the schach, which is within 20 amois. Then b'mavui nami lemiklois. So too by the mavui, which is the bottom layer of the kara of the crossbeam is also within esrim amo, and it should be kosher as well. Iklash kolashus havole kara haniteles beruach. If you're going to say that, then the bottom layer of the crossbeam will be so thin that a wind could remove it, whereby it won't be valid. So to ask the Gemara, if you're also going to say that we go with a thin layer that is on the bottom, within 20 amos, the bottom layer of the schach, so then you'll be left with then a chamosamu b'tzilosa, which also poisel the sukkah. Rather, you must say that we will view the bottom layer as being that the tzel is greater than the chama, which will make the sukkah valid. If that's true, so then we'll go the other way and ask when it comes to mavoi too. When it comes to the cross beam, we should look at the bottom layer of the beam as being a metal piece that will withhold ruach, and therefore that should also be valid. So again, if you're going to say that the sukkah is valid, then you should say that the mavoi is also valid. Omar rova mipar zgika sukkah de leyochid hi. Rami anafshe umidkar. Since the sukkah is, now we have the svaras hafuchos. Now we say, since the sukkah is an individual who a person alone uses his sukkah, so then he knows nobody else will be responsible for his sukkah. And therefore, if the bottom layer is going to be removed, then he knows he has to take care of it. Whereas when it comes to the mavui, since the rabbim are using it, each one relies on the other one. So nobody thinks that he has to fix if the bottom layer becomes invalid. The amrei inshi, for people say, Kideiro de beishutfi, when you have a pot of two partners, meaning two cooks that have the same pot, it won't be hot and won't be cold because each one relies on the other one to make it hot or the other one to make it cold. And therefore, so to over here, each one is relying on the other one to fix the kara. Ravina has another mahalach to explain why when it comes to sukkah, it's valid. When it comes to the mavui, it's invalid. Sukkah diaraisa lo boy chizik. Since sukkah is diaraisa, so therefore the Rabban did not have to give a chizuk. And therefore they said that in such a case, it's going to be valid if some of the schach is going to be beneath esrim amam. Mavui derabonen boy chizuk. Whereas when it comes to a mavui, since it is rabbinic in nature, therefore if it has only partially underneath esrim amam, but the rest is above esrim amam, they had to give chizuk, and therefore they said it's invalid.